TASER. I'm very delighted and privileged to have two extremely experienced colleagues from the UK, one who's the National Police Chiefs Council lead for less lethal options, Chief Constable Lucy Dorsey, and I'll ask her to say a little bit in a moment, and retired Police Sergeant Andy Harding. So, Lucy?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Really feel very privileged to be here in Anguilla, and thank you very much for the Commissioner for inviting me over. I'm Lucy Dorsey. I'm a Chief Constable in the UK, and I am in charge of British Transport Police, which is a force that covers the 3 countries of England, Scotland and Wales. And I am also here because I am the National Police Chiefs Council lead for TASER, and in effect I am the custodian of TASER for the UK.
Andy?
Hello, yeah, Andy Harding. I'm the National Police Chiefs Council Strategic Manager for less lethal weapons and counter drones in the UK. I retired from the Metropolitan Police as an inspector a couple of years ago, and am now working direct to Chief Constable Lucy Dorsey as her advisor for all less lethal weapons, which includes TASERs.
So, okay, thank you very much. So the purpose of today is to give a couple of presentations. I'll give some opening remarks and talk through why I, as the Commissioner, think that it's really important that the RAPF have access to this device. And then I'll hand over to both Lucy and to Andy, and they will give a lot more detail on what TASER is, more importantly, what it isn't, the level of training that the RAPF are receiving from the UK trainers who are here for the next few weeks. So we have 4 UK trainers here to help us train trainers within the RAPF, so that when the time is right, we will be able to train our own staff and then introduce, hopefully, the TASER device onto the island. So I'll start very quickly with the presentation, Lloyd, if that's okay. Yes. I'll get it worked right. So hopefully that's a little clear enough for you, Lloyd. Okay. All right. So why are we doing this? Why are we proposing to go about doing this? For me, I, as the Commissioner, through the offices of the Governor and the Premier and the government on the island, it's my mandate to ensure the safety of the community on this island and the officers who work for me. Now, most people on the island will already know that we carry a number of items with us, including firearms, batons, incapacitant spray, and handcuffs. However, for me, there is a gap which needs to be filled. We need another option on this island, I believe, that gives us a bridge between the use of a baton or incapacitant spray or hands on an individual who is violent, between that and actually drawing and using a firearm. People on this island will be aware that, unfortunately, in the past, police have had to use lethal force in circumstances. And we believe that the introduction of this particular device will help prevent that as we move forward. So if I quickly take a look at the law and legislation as to why, again, I believe this is important. So when it comes to the law, there are a number of things. So Section 21 of the Criminal Code which talks about how we use force and that it must be proportionate in the circumstances that we use it. Then we need to look at the common law, which is across the Caribbean region. And again, that can sometimes be a mixture of legal conventions and case law. Now, when I looked at our constitution, when I looked at it in 1982, it was very clear that when that constitution was being set up, that human rights were right at the heart and centre of that constitution. And I have commented that those were in force on this island many years before the Human Rights Act was enacted back in both Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So this island was really centred on the rights of people who live here. And some of those, particularly Article 2 in the Constitution, which looks at the right to life, is absolutely key to me as the Commissioner in making sure that this island stays safe. There are a number of other international conventions and case law that we would look at when we're introducing this. So when it comes to the use of force, sorry, go ahead. We will look to introduce at some stage the TASER X2 device. Now, TASER is a trade name. It's made by Axon. Andy Harding, who has many years' experience in both the device and the policy, and is considered certainly an international expert when it comes to TASER and the implementation of TASER. We'll talk more in depth about the weapon itself, what it does, but more importantly, some of the myths that sometimes are around the use of the weapon. Accountability, of course, will be a key issue on the island. As you're aware, we are already equipped with firearms. So when it comes to this, I've taken a number of actions leading up to the introduction of this, such as a specific and bespoke TASER policy in relation to the device. I've also looked at updating the use of force policy to make sure that it covers the use of the device. And Andy will very clearly outline in his presentation that it is not just about the device being fired. There are a number of other times when we will consider the device to have been used, and I think that is really important and reassuring for the residents in Anguilla. In addition, the use of force form that I've talked about, that has also been updated to ensure that we cover all the potential uses of TASER. The post-incident management system, if there is the firing of the device, will be extremely robust, and as I've said before in some of the other engagement meetings, I, the deputy, or one of the superintendents will attend the scene anytime this device is fired to give a complete overview of what happened, what needs to be recovered, and the welfare of any individual who may have been affected by the use of the device. I did put out a post on the 1st of December, I think, saying that we had some colleagues from Axon who came here. They trained 3 of my staff in relation to being technicians for TASER. That's particularly important to the downloads. This is an extremely accountable device. Andy will explain more about that, and you can ask questions if you need be. And I know for those who are online, if you want to ask questions, please feed them in, and I'm sure Lloyd will pass those on. I need to be very clear. This is not in response to what is going on in the island at the moment. This has been a long-standing project that has been some time in coming to fruition. This is about, as I've said, and I need to reiterate this, it is about absolutely making sure that we use the least amount of force when it comes to dealing with individuals on this island and keeping them safe. it is also about ensuring the safety of my officers. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Andy. I know you want to plug the presentation in.
Do you want me to do that?
No, I'll go
Oh, sorry.
I think
Yeah,
Lucy's
sorry.
going to start first.
Okay, fine.
I thought it would probably be quite helpful just to reflect on the journey that UK policing has had in relation to the implementation of TASER. And it's been a long journey in the UK. And we first started in 2003. And I think the important thing I would say is, we've learned a lot of lessons on the journey, and some of those are really positive lessons that we would share and say, this is good work for implementation. But we also made mistakes on the way, and I always think the strength of any organisation is around looking at yourself in the mirror, being prepared to accept where things haven't quite gone according to plan. And then we want to share those with you in terms of the Anguillan community and the Commissioner, so that hopefully that you don't make some of those mistakes that we made, which is important. And if we look back in history, I suppose the question is why did the UK introduce TASER? And very much in recognising the Commissioner's points in terms of the United Nations, there was a very clear challenge that it was just not acceptable for armed officers with fatal weaponry not to have a less lethal option, because people's behaviour changes. You might deploy a certain type of officer to start with their equipment, but actually we wanted to make sure that there is always the opportunity to resolve an incident with a less lethal option. And for me, I've got nearly 33 years in policing. The policing tools to deal with an incident start with our communication skills, and then ultimately you've got lethal force at the very far end in terms of the equipment that's available. So we started our journey in 2003. We trialled it into some of the UK forces. It had a little bit of a bumpy journey to start with, but we've managed to roll that out. To start with, it was our firearms officers who had the less lethal option. It then became specially trained officers, so some of our public order trained officers then had TASER, and then we moved on to, now we're in a position in the UK that our frontline officers do carry TASER. They are unarmed, and I think probably for the Anguillan community, just a reminder that most of UK policing is largely an unarmed police service. I think the last statistics were around about sort of between 13 and 17% of the force actually have a firearm, so it's a very low number of people that actually carry a gun. One of the things that I wanted to reassure the Anguillan community was very much in terms of how has it been tested, are we satisfied that it is a safe device to be used? And in the UK, different chief constables, of which I am one of them, we make a decision on how much we want TASER to be deployed, how many officers are to carry it on a day-to-day basis, and that's done through our strategic threat and risk assessments. It is not personal protective equipment in the UK. So if I go out on patrol with my officers, there's certain bits of equipment I have to carry because that is considered personal protective equipment for me, and also in terms of how I'm able to do my duty. It is not personal protective equipment. We don't recruit police officers in the UK and test their competence to carry TASER at the point of recruitment. It's something that they can choose to do within their career, and we require on people volunteering to say, hey, I'd like to be a TASER trained officer, and then there is a selection process for that back in the UK. But TASER has been rigorously tested, as the Commissioner said. It's produced by Axon, and it goes through a lot of testing within the UK before we recommend to the Home Secretary through her department, his department currently, that they sign it off for use in the UK. And there's a very strong governance process around TASER. So I sit and I have oversight for policing. Andy Harding, who's with me on the visit, he does a lot of the coordination around it, and we have lots of multi-agency meetings. We have 4 during the year, where we will provide all of the updates in relation to TASER. So particularly at the moment, we are looking at the next iteration of TASER as a device. And again, we make sure that everybody's involved in the development of that. But there are two key bodies that test TASER. So one is, the first one is called DSTL, which is the Government Scientific Department. It's based in Porton Down in the UK. You might well have seen it on some of the movies, and it tests a lot of things for policing, for the armed forces, for the security service, and it tests the device. And I've summed it up in some of the other presentations as part of the engagement programme that the Commission is leading on, which is to say, does it say what it says on the tin? And the scientists put it through extremely rigorous testing to check that. So that's one thing that we have to be satisfied before it's deployed. The second area we need to be satisfied is in terms of the medical evidence. And we're very tight on ensuring that we understand the medical implications of the use of TASER. And there is an arm's length body called SACMIL. Don't ask me what it stands for because I can't remember at this moment in time, but SACMIL got a lot of very experienced medical professionals that sit on that. It's an independent body, and it will look at the medical evidence that surrounds TASER to tell us that in terms of its use, it's safe to use. And once those two criteria are met, then we will push it through in terms of requiring the Home Secretary to sign it off. So at the moment, we use the device that Andy's going to talk through and show you the device that we use. And then, of course, at the moment, as I said, we're looking at developing an implementation of a new device into the UK. But again, it has to go through that rigorous process. So hopefully that gives people the confidence in relation to the device itself and its usage. But I'm very keen to hear if there are any questions from anybody, because there's a lot of fact out there and there's a lot of myth about TASER, and we're here to hopefully answer some of those questions. But I'll probably pass on to Andy, who'll tell you a little bit more about the device.
Lovely, thanks very much indeed. It's the Scientific Advisory Committee for the Medical Implications of Less Lethal Weapons. That's the medical group called SACMIL who review everything for us. So I'm going to pick up the presentation now at the point where we have a discussion about the actual weapon itself, so that people and the viewers can actually get to know what it is, how it works, and what have you. So, I mean, when I go into community presentations and there's an audience, I always ask people, what is it you actually know about TASER? And it's probably not surprising to know that everybody gets a lot of their information from the internet and from social media, and a lot of that is very negative, especially with some of the things that people come up with. For example, TASER kills, TASER has got a lot of electricity, 50,000 volts, all sorts of things like that. So it's really, really important that we address all of those points that people bring up, and I'm sure that the viewers here will probably have other things that they'd like to raise. And again, we're always available or at the end of communications to actually address those things. But let's go into some of the detail about some of the common things that come up. So first of all, the devices that would be available over here are these devices here, which is the TASER X2. The first thing that we will notice about this device is it's bright yellow. And that is a really important part of the process, because TASER works on two levels. It works on a physiological and a psychological level. So we'll deal with the physiological side in a minute, but first of all, the psychological side of it. This yellow device is very well known around the world. So as officers in the UK, we wear this prominently on our belt so that when we are out on patrol, people can actually see it and see that we have it. The other thing as well, which is really important, is that we don't actually deploy with frontline officers with black tasers, and a number of reasons for that. Number one, you can't see it very easily, but also it could look like a handgun. and we don't want to get the two confused, okay? So the other thing to bear in mind here as well is where it is actually placed on an officer's body is really, really important as well. So ever since we've had it, this has always been positioned on the weak side of the officer's uniform, and if they carry a gun, that is always on the strong side. So with training and muscle memory, we are never going to get to a situation where an officer will mix the two up. We've seen this happen before in other parts of the world, where an officer has drawn their gun and shouted taser, taser, and then shot somebody and it's ended fatally. And that's something that we obviously need to make sure that people understand does not happen and will not happen in these circumstances here. Very important point that. The other thing to bear in mind about this device as well is the word use of taser. Now, we need to be really clear on this. A use of taser in most people's minds is pulling the trigger and it actually being used, okay? But we don't. We actually record 7 different uses of taser itself. 4 of those uses are non-firings, okay? So they would be along the lines of drawing the weapon, aiming the weapon, arcing the weapon, and red dotting the weapon. Now, obviously, we use the word red dotting, but laser dotting is another equally used phrase. And each of those are recorded by police as well. Now, over the years, ever since we started to use taser, we have built up an extremely large amount of data in the UK to record what officers are doing with this device. And it's very clear to us, and obviously we can present this today, that 90% of the time that police officers are called to incidents of violence or threats of violence in the UK, this is not fired. It is one of the other 4 uses, the passive uses. So it's either drawn, aimed, arced, or laser dot. And that is a really important message for everybody. So the mere presence of this device at incidents is enough to bring violence or threats of violence to a swift conclusion without the need to actually fire it. So I'm going to show you on this device exactly what I mean when I say drawing, aiming, arcing, and red dotting. So at the moment, just to be very, very clear, there would be a cartridge on the front of this that has probes in it, and I'll talk about that in a second. So this is actually not armed itself with a cartridge, not loaded with a cartridge. So obviously drawing, aiming is 2 of the uses. Arcing is another one, so I'm going to show you how it arcs. So we would be presented with somebody who has perhaps got a knife on them and they're being threatening, and we want them to drop the knife and they're not dropping it. So we could get the taser out, we can turn it on, and we can pull the trigger and arc it. And it goes like this. And at the same time as that is arcing, we would be shouting at them, this is a taser, 50,000 volts, drop the knife or it may be used against you. And
sorry, did you get a photo? Did you get a photo?
In this part.
With the arcing?
I'll do it again for you, okay? So, ready for this?
Yeah, point it at him.
Do you want to point it towards yourself? There we go. So, that is enough for the vast majority of people who are presented with that to actually cease their violence and to put the knife down, for example. The red dot as well is something that we capitalise on. We all know that in films, when red dots are put on somebody's chest, something catastrophic might happen. So we will put that red dot on somebody's chest and say to them, this is a taser, 50,000 volts, please put the knife down or it may be used against you. And again, to illustrate that, I'm going to just point it at the wall behind me so that we can see it on the wall. That is a red dot. Okay? And again, the vast majority of times that we actually do that, people will stop what they're doing. So it's really clear to us in policing that, again, this does not have to be fired in order for it to be effective to us. And that's a really positive thing, because if you think about what we would do without this device, it would more than likely result in officers having to get close to people, and therefore there is the potential for injury as a result of people fighting. And that's something that was eradicated as a result of this device being introduced. Not completely, but obviously it helps. Okay, so there are going to be times though, and as I've already said, where officers are faced with somebody who we go through these processes with, and it's not worked, and they're still being threatening, or they're still posing a threat to themselves, other people, or the officers. Now, these sort of circumstances are usually when there's drink, drugs, mental health issues, language barriers, or people who have a determined mindset. And in those circumstances, the taser would then probably have to be used and fired against that person. Now, when we do actually pull the trigger, a number of things will actually happen. So I'm now going to go into the physiological side of taser, so when we actually need to use it. So the first thing that I'd like to show everybody is one of the cartridges that would be in the X2 is this. So this would be in the front of the cartridge there. It slots into the front and then clicks into place, and there's two of those in the front of this device, okay? Now, when the cartridge is inside the device, it has all of this wire, which is inside the cartridge, and there are two of these probes. Now, I don't know if you want to get a photograph of these probes up close now, or if you want to do it later, but this is a probe that will come out of the cartridge when the trigger is pulled. There is 21 or 25 feet of copper wire attached to it, so that gives officers the distance that they need in order to deal with a person.
Is that injected in the person?
Yes, so this, when it comes out the end of the cartridge, there will be two of them that come out the end at the same time, and these will attach themselves to the person's clothing or skin, okay? I have actually been shot with a taser, and I can obviously tell your viewers exactly how it feels to have taser used upon you. It's obviously a painful experience, but the most important thing about it is that after the 5 seconds, I was able to stand up and act normally, and everything was absolutely fine. There was no injuries or anything at all.
Yeah, so two of my questions.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've now got a situation where somebody has presented us with a threat. They've got a knife. It's a life-threatening situation. We've asked them to stop doing what they're doing, and they've said, you know, no, we're not going to stop. I'm going to carry on. So we need to fire it. So we pull the trigger. Two of these probes come out with the copper wire attached. They go towards the person who would normally be standing probably between 11 and 15 feet away, and these will attach themselves to the person. When they attach themselves to the person, we have 50,000 volts in the machine that will course down the wires into the person who we've fired it against. Now, the first thing is that we want to cover here is the fact that we capitalise on 50,000 volts, and we say 50,000 volts. It's a huge number, and it sounds really high. However, it's a little bit of a myth here, because it's not actually the volts that would do any damage. It would be the amps that are within the device that would actually do the damage on the person. So the volts themselves actually reduce as they go along the wires to about 1,000 volts when it gets to the end of the wire, and that allows the amps to jump the gap between the probes and the person's skin. So if the person is wearing a jumper, for example, and there's a gap between the jumper and the skin, it will actually jump that gap in order to achieve the desired aim. Now, what is the actual desired aim? So what we're actually trying to achieve here is something called neuromuscular incapacitation. Now, neuromuscular incapacitation is the messages that go from the brain to the muscles are interrupted, which makes the muscles freeze, which means you lose your posture and your balance and you would fall over. So that is actually what we're trying to achieve, something called neuromuscular incapacitation. Now, the volts and the amps that achieve this are very small. So just to put it into some sort of context for you, If we're looking at something like a defibrillator, now a defibrillator works on, the old ones work on about 350 joules of energy, the new ones about 120 to 240 joules of energy. The taser works on around about 0.07 joules of energy, so it's a fraction of the impact that a defibrillator would actually use, and that coupled with the amps are designed to affect skeletal muscle and not penetrate deeply into the body. So that is the design which makes it, and I put it in inverted commas, a safer option for us to use. Now, I'm not here for 1 minute saying that anything that we do is 100% safe, because it's not. We're in the risk business here, and we've got to impress on people that we're talking about situations of violence or threats of violence. We're not talking about, you know, innocent people here. We're talking about people that we have been called to deal with. So the other option obviously is brute force or lethal force, and we have to have something that works in between. Now in the UK, since 2004, we have had over those years many incidents. In 1 year we had about 34,000 incidents, and there were only 3,000 firings. With regards to the deaths, and again people say, you know, taser kills people, we have had 2 officially recorded coroner's reports that have said that taser is a contributory factor in 2 deaths out of all those years. When we put that into perspective, number one, it is not the sole factor. We have a situation in both of those incidents where the people had extremely high levels of cocaine in their system as well. And as we all know, cocaine is an extremely cardiotoxic drug. So therefore, we have to bear that in mind, that that is more than likely going to be the majority contributory factor in that person's demise. When somebody is in a situation of high intensity, then heart rates are going to go up anyway. So when you add use of force to that, obviously it is all going to have an impact. Okay, so that's something that we do have to bear in mind. However, from 2004 to date, 2 people. When you look at the statistics in the UK with regards to deaths in custody as a result of restraint, you're looking at around 470 over that period of time. So it gives you some contrast there, that there are uses of force that we do use that do have a higher impact on people than the taser. Yes.
How does it affect someone with a heart condition?
And this is a really good point. So as I said, the joules of energy that we've got in it, so the impact of the device is extremely low. And if somebody has a heart condition, so there's two parts to this answer. Number one, the taser itself isn't designed to necessarily affect the heart. Obviously, the high stress of a situation can have an impact on it, but this itself is not designed to actually have that impact. But what we've got to bear in mind here is that, number one, the officers aren't going to necessarily know that that person in front of them has any form of problem at all. In fact, the person themselves might not know that they've actually got a problem at all. The second point is that person that we are engaging with is engaged in violence or threats of violence where lives could be at risk. So we have to deal with them, and we have to deal with that situation. So at that point, obviously, we would need to deal with what's happening first. Now, what I can assure you of, certainly with officers in the UK, and it would there's no reason why it would be different here, is that anything that results in a medical emergency will be given the highest attention by us as officers, and I'm sure it would be the same here as well. And any problems that happen will get the relevant and appropriate medical attention on it too. So, that's with how the taser works. Now, this neuromuscular incapacitation that we're trying to achieve is something that would obviously last for 5 seconds. As soon as the device has stopped working on that person, then that person should be returning back to normal as well.
So these are practically used to subdue an aggressor. Sorry. So I'm just for clarity. So these 2 devices, they are the TASER X2.
TASER X2, and this one isn't the older one, which is the X26.
Okay. Okay.
but that won't be used for
This will
the
not be
no,
used.
No.
it's the X2 where
So the
if
but
we-
you said we won't be discharging this, so this is basically just used to intimidate any potential assailants and so forth, so it would not be actually used or anything?
Yeah, all the uses that I've explained to you are going to be available to police officers. So they can draw it, they can aim it, they can red dot it, they can arc it,
Worst
then-
case scenario.
they can fire it.
Fire.
Okay.
Absolutely,
Alright.
yeah.
And so the range, how far can it be extended to? Only 15 feet or beyond 15 feet?
Right, so what we've got to bear in mind here is that if we are trying to get 2 probes onto somebody 25 feet away, then that's going to be quite a tough challenge. And if one of the probes misses, then there's no circuit and it won't work. So what we say to officers is give yourselves a good chance of being able to deploy this in the right way. Get yourselves into a position where you've got a good target area, a safe target area, and make sure that you're deploying it around about that 15 feet.
These are electrical devices, right? But is there any protector or buffer perhaps? Say for instance there's an incident on the beach and the assailant probably is in the water. Can the device be used in the water as well without electrocuting the person?
Yeah, so again, the electricity goes between the 2 probes themselves. So if the person is in the water, and people, I'm sure there have been, I think there's been some videos in the United States that have emerged of people in pools that have been tased and all the rest of it. Now, there's a really interesting point here. Okay, so people could use it in the water, for example, but what we've got to bear in mind is that if that person goes into neuromuscular incapacitation in the water, then they could fall into the water, and obviously if the officer's not in a position to get them out, then they could drown. So again, our officers who are involved in the training with local officers would cover that and make sure that officers are aware of the dangers of doing it. Equally, another area that we would never advocate unless there was some major reason why we would have to do it is deploying this at height. So people who are, standing on a balcony or on the edge of a building or whatever, the officers would have to be very careful about deploying it in those circumstances, because if the person loses their posture and balance and they fall backwards, they could go over the edge of the balcony, and obviously you then have secondary injuries such as head injuries, broken bones and what have you. So again, all of these areas are danger areas that we would make sure the officers here are fully aware of before they go out and do it. And what we've got to bear in mind as well is that this device on its own, without anybody holding it, is perfectly safe. So it's sitting there and it's not hurting anybody. So the person that is in control of it is totally in control of when, where and how it is deployed. So we need to make sure that officers are aware of the laws, their legal frameworks, the environment that they're in, the capabilities of the people that they are against at that moment in time, and ultimately anything they do they have to justify, and it has to be a written justification as well. So they deploy it knowing that afterwards they are going to have to justify why they did it, and if they can't justify why they did it, then obviously there are other questions that need to be answered.
You talk about the weak side and the strong side, and the taser will be placed on the weaker side. I'm not sure what it's, and police terms, whether that be the left or the right, but I know some persons are right-handed and left-handed, and we tend to do everything that we are comfortable with.
Yep.
So if you're right-handed, we prefer things to be on the right-hand side. If you're left-handed,
Yep.
but I guess in this you don't have a choice. I guess you make the determination which is the weak side.
No, it will be down to the individual.
Oh,
So,
the individual,
if you
okay.
are right-handed,
Okay, so
it
that
will
is-
be over on the left side, and if you're left-handed, it will be over on the right-hand side. So it does move.
Okay, okay, so it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Mr. Clark, do you know the TASER X2 is used by our other regional counterparts within the Caribbean as well?
There's TASER is in the Caribbean already. We're probably coming to one of the last 3 territories that it hasn't been deployed in, so they use a variety of TASERs. This is the one that I would certainly be most commonly familiar with back home. That's what we would currently use.
So Axon is the maker of these devices, and they are used by law enforcement agencies, and some are even built for civilians. Is it legal for the ordinary person here in Anguilla to import tasers?
No. No, it's a prohibited weapon.
Okay. Based on what is happening outside the gun violence, what are the devices for the regular person on the street we can use to ensure our own safety?
Well, I think when you're talking about devices, there are a number of devices which are out there. You may be talking about mace or some incapacitated spray. Again, for a member of the public, that would be illegal to purchase and bring onto the island. What I have seen back home is that particularly people who feel vulnerable, you can buy devices which emit an extremely loud noise. And if that does not scare the person off, then it has the possibility of attracting help. So if that were to come onto the island by people who felt vulnerable, that would not necessarily be an issue. But I think some of the things that you're talking about would fall into prohibited items when it comes to the firearms order.
Back to the training, can you tell us how many officers are currently being trained?
So at the moment, this is a train the trainer program. So we have 4 expert trainers from the United Kingdom who are here. And they are currently training 6 of our officers to be able to deliver the training to use TASER when we decide to deploy the weapon on island. So this is about the UK, and I will say this, as far as I'm concerned, the training that and the safeguards that the UK have in place are world leading. Okay, they're absolutely world leading. So the training that we are getting is exactly the same as any UK trainer would get back home. So as far as I'm concerned as the Commissioner, my officers, because I believe, Lucy, if I'm right, we are the first overseas territory to receive the UK training package. So as far as I am concerned as Commissioner, we will have the best trained officers to use this device across any of the overseas territories, but particularly the Caribbean overseas territories. So that gives me high levels of confidence.
Somewhere down the road in the future, would you recommend other agencies to be trained in TASER? For instance, we have immigration, customs, border enforcement, and maybe, again, further down the road, maybe even security officers.
That is certainly a consideration that we need to look at. I think it's a very sensible discussion to have as we move forward. But again, I can't speak for customs or immigration or some of the companies, but I think it's a very useful discussion to have, and I think it's one to have with both the departments but the government as well.
Have you seen any cases where there's a need? Have you seen any cases locally where there's an actual need between the police officers and a culprit for the use of TASERs, actually?
Yes, Mr. Harrigan. I can think of at least 1 and possibly 2 cases in the recent past where officers have deployed to an incident and unfortunately have had to use lethal force on those individuals. I believe, and it is my firm belief, that had there been an option like that at the time, the outcome might have been different. It absolutely might have been different. And you know, I'm back to what I said at the start of the presentation. I am mandated around the safety of individuals on this island, and I would not like an incident of that nature to happen in the future and the officers not have the ability to bring it to a successful resolution for that individual, because they may need help around mental health or addiction issues, and you know, by using that type of device, it gives us the ability to bring them under control really quickly, and as Andy said, you know, it is 5 seconds initially that gives the incapacitation that allows officers to move in to put handcuffs on or restrain in a way, and then when, you know, the surge has passed, that person is very quickly back on their feet, almost instantaneously, and then that allows us to get them the medical aid that they may require. But yes, I can think of 2 instances on this island that device may have prevented.
Are the probes retrievable after they've been fired?
Oh yes, that's part of the evidential collection process. So whether it's from the clothing or indeed from the individual because it's penetrated the skin, that all forms part of the accountability process.
I was going to say, I think it's really important to also to note that when it comes to officers' equipment, this is probably the most accountable piece of kit that we actually have. So obviously when you fire a gun, obviously we'll probably know it's been fired, but that's all that you all know. With this, it tells you the time it was fired, how long an officer has fired it for. So, you know, we've certainly had incidents in the UK where a subject has said the officer used it 7 times on me. When we've downloaded it, it's actually been once. So this is very accountable. So that's a good thing with regards to openness and transparency to the public, but also it avoids any confusion when an incident has happened too.
The probes are not reusable, right? 'Cause
No. Once the cartridge is used,
Okay.
that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
What if a culprit is holding on to a person who he's attacking, if he's physically holding on to him, and you fire a taser at a culprit, would that transfer the shock?
No, so the electricity is delivered between the 2 probes. Okay, so if I put a probe here and a probe on my leg, then it's going to be the muscles that are between those 2 areas that are affected. So if I'm holding on to the Commissioner now and I've got 2 probes here, it won't affect him. If the Commissioner decides to put himself between the 2 probes as well, then he might get a kick from the device, but it will only be something that will make him recoil. So it's not something that, you know, you're going to get drawn into as well. So again, you know, officers will know that if they are turning up and they get the target acquisition at the time, that they can actually deploy it safely without affecting other people as well. Yeah.
So Commissioner, how soon do you see the officers using these tasers, and how many would we need in the first instance?
So initially what I would intend to do, Felicia, is that our tactical unit, who have the most training in relation to firearms, I would see them being initially equipped with the device because they are most likely the ones who will attend that particular type of call. Then when I look at the rest of the response teams, there has been a question of, is every police officer going to have one? No, they're not. No, they're not. I would see perhaps 1 person on a team per shift having access to that. So that's about, again, accountability for me, and that I know that it is properly trained officers who are going to have this. So it is not a widespread issue to everyone in the force. No, it's not. It will be a very select number of officers initially.
What is the cost of one of those devices?
We're quite lucky in that Axon very kindly donated them to us, so we got them for nothing.
Okay, that's good. How many do you want to say?
Not just at the moment, no. But I will find out for you and I'll tell you about later.
A question online is, will officers who are provided with tasers be required to have a body camera?
At this stage, body-worn video is not on standard issue within the RAPF. It is something that we're looking at, Lloyd. It'll probably be a project for later this year or perhaps next year. there are some funding streams that we need to understand for what that means. So initially, no, but I'm fairly confident with my 8 months in the island that with mobile phone coverage on the island, that it'll be pretty well captured.
There's another question. Lloyd's Life, please ask if they will be taking statistics on the use of tasers, which will provide taser injuries and taser deaths.
The answer is yes. It's all included in the use of force form. There's another gentleman that you can't see off camera, Martin Underhill, who's here. And can I say you're speaking with an academic body here? Am I allowed to say that at this stage?
Yes.
Okay, so Martin sits on an oversight panel back in the UK that would work with Lucy in relation to this. He's also an academic, an ex-police officer as well. And he is working with the University of the West Indies to look at the rollout of TASER, so there will be an academic piece of work.
There's a comment, it says, I hope that the training will be very extensive because tasers can be deadly.
Well, I mean, I can answer that one. I mean, the training that we provide and are providing to your officers here, and I want to also say that my team have been over here for 2 days already with the officers, and we provide training not just in the UK, but we do help other countries as well. My officers have already commented on the high standard of officers that we have here as well. However, what I will say to you is that the training that we provide is intensive, it is comprehensive, and it covers everything that we will need to. The course itself runs over 3 intensive days on top of any firearms training, so it's not threaded in, it is very separate so that we understand exactly what the device does. On top of that, data is collected, as the Commissioner has also said, but officers will also be refreshed every year in its use as well. So it's not just a one-off, this is a continual programme to keep the officers' competencies and standards high, and it professionalises the service as well. The other thing, the data is not just collected and never used, we use the data, we study the data very hard indeed, and the data will tell us whether we are going down the right track or not, whether we need to adapt, whether we need to extend, whether we need to reduce. So that is something that I'm sure the Commissioner will be looking at in time as well.
And I just need to come back to the quality and the standard of training, and I said it slightly earlier. As far as I am concerned, the training that we are receiving at the moment is of the highest calibre. There's no question about that in my mind. And when it comes to officers who may have this device in the future, as far as I'm concerned, in this region, they will have received the best training of anyone in this region on that device.
If I can just add to that, you know, the training, the course content is licensed by the College of Policing in the UK, and that's very important. You know, people, you know, the Commissioner has, you know, made sure that, in my view, he is purchasing the best training curriculum in order to make sure that the officers that are out there, having been trained, have received the best training. I'm slightly biased. I think it's the best in the world, and I would say that. But equally, I have brought out with me my Chief Firearms Instructor to make sure that we are satisfied with the, you know, the training that is being delivered by the officers that we've brought over to deliver that. Because, you know, in my experience, it's about having well-equipped and well-trained officers to deliver an outstanding service to communities, and that's exactly where I feel that your Commissioner is in terms of, you know, embarking on a collaboration with the UK in order to deliver, you know, TASER training. You can get TASER training from lots of different places, and I think it's, you know, it's a great decision. I am slightly biased, but it's a great decision by your commissioner to do something to make sure that officers are well equipped in terms of getting the right device, and that they're well trained to use that to protect the communities here in Anguilla. And I would just echo Andy's point. I've been really impressed with your officers that are going through the Train the Trainer programme. Their knowledge of some of the UK models that have been developed in terms of the national decision-making model, which is all of the things that we all do every day. If you make a decision to stop at a red traffic light or not, you go through a thought process, don't you? And they're exactly the same sort of things through the national decision-making model that we expect officers to consider. So some of your thoughtful questions about what happens in water, what happens at height, if you're inside a property and you deploy the device and somebody does fall, where are they going to fall? All that decision-making stuff. And I've observed some of the training, and I think that your officers, which I've fed back to the Commissioner, have been great. Fantastic questions. We've given them some scenarios, we've showed them some footage, and they've asked some great questions. And some of it I would probably say have been really thoughtful questions, Andy, haven't
Yeah,
they?
very
I've been
much
really impressed with it.
And of course, they've been calculated decisions, calculated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're calculated, well thought out, and they are all looking at the consequences, because there's always a consequence to any decision that we make. And they have to weigh those situations up. And again, we don't take this lightly at all. We are only as good as our successes at the end of the day. And we need to make sure that this is trained and deployed in an appropriate way.
And I think, in fairness, if I may say, I think the opportunity for firearms officers to have a less lethal option, is extremely powerful. But I have seen it in the UK. Previously I was in charge in the Metropolitan Police with firearms, some of the firearms teams that are out there. And I've got friends who are firearms officers, and growing up in policing, I've seen deployments of firearms officers, split-second decisions that people have got to make, and they are highly trained people, as they are here in Anguilla. And I've seen some of the skill of choosing to deploy the less lethal option rather than a lethal option. And at the end of the day, everybody's lived to tell the story or be held to account. And I think it is good to have that less lethal option. And I think that was recognised by the UN, which prompted the UK's decision making around having a less lethal option.
Can you just tell us per capita between comparison between Anguilla and maybe one of your counties in the UK, the occurrence of guns, gunshots, gun usage in your county in comparison to Anguilla? How do you rate it?
So I mean, the Commissioner might be better able to answer it from a specific perspective. I think in the UK, the sort of type of incidents where taser, the presence of taser causes the situation to diffuse is many and varied. So I would say in the UK we still would say it's very hard for access to firearms by the criminal community, organised crime. It is still, we are a hostile country for people wanting to use guns for, criminal purposes. And I recognise, I do recognise that. Knife crime, certainly I think officers, are very alive to the threat from knife crime. But actually, if you look at some of the data, some of it is not really in relation to those, you've got domestic incidents. It is about the threat that is posed to you. And nobody is saying that taser is, necessarily the solution to somebody who is standing there with a firearm. But we know that, on some occasions, highly trained officers presented with what appears to be a firearm will make a choice to deploy a less lethal option, and that has been used to good effect. But I think in terms of the presence of violence, it's many and varied. It's not just limited to guns, it's knives, it's physical violence. And also, we have had it in incidents where people are threatening their own life, and it's an opportunity to preserve life through the presence of a less lethal option.
And to add to that as well, I want to be really clear about this. I know we're talking about TASER and everybody's questions are about TASER, and TASER suddenly becomes the thing that everybody's focused on. But let's not forget, officers have other tactical options as well. The biggest tactical option that we have is talking to people, and we will continue to talk to people. We do in the UK, they will still carry on talking to people here. That is our preferred weapon of choice, if you like, to de-escalate a situation, to try to talk people down. And then TASER fits in with loads of other different options. So all the other options are available as well. Like I said before, this might not be the ideal choice in the sea or on a balcony or whatever. So therefore officers cannot be focused solely on TASER. It fits into a load of different other options that officers need to consider when they are dealing with an incident. So hopefully, and again, we will be able to judge this over a period of time. We will be able to see how this is used when officers record their use of force.
I think your presentation was very comprehensive, and I think we can go away with a good knowledge of what we're going to.
Anything more online, Lloyd? Any other questions that anybody online would like to ask? No? I'm happy to show you just before you go actually what it looks like when TASER is deployed, so it'll give you an idea of how it will be deployed and actually what it looks like when it's deployed.
Can I add one thing which is slightly different from my perspective? So in the UK, we do have an underrepresentation of women officers carrying TASER, and it's something that we work quite hard at to make sure that we've got a good representation in terms of who carries TASER in the UK. And I felt quite inspired actually on day one to see the presence of women officers as part of the training programme, so that was really nice to see.
Any final questions? No, thank you very much for coming, and we'll take you to the demonstration.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that yours, Mr. Hardy?
Yes.
Yes, 50,000, this is 50,000
50,
volts.
yeah.
Yeah, it is, but only when the trigger's pulled it goes down, as it goes down the wires, but the volts don't do anything for anybody anyway, it's the amps.
Does all carry the same amount of voltage or different?
No, they're all the same.
All
Well, yeah, all this and the X26 the same, yeah.
Yeah, you're going
Huh?
to squeeze it.
Oh, oh, come closer, you said?
Yes.
Oh.
Tell them to get started.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to.
You're still live?
They're coming up. Felicia and James are gonna come, but they're just doing a little demonstration of TASER downstairs. But I'm packing up to come straight. Okay.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. James.
Yeah.
Carry this tripod downstairs for me, please.
Certainly.
James, you like the demonstration?
Yeah, I think you go off to the classroom.
Like,
Downstairs.
like they're gonna wait for us, you wanna just,
They're not up here. So, yeah.
like, they're gonna wait for something, let's go to the, and we have to carry the stuff down.
Go ahead and carry it on in the meantime.
No, we're going to
But
the demo.
remember, I still have to pack up. I still have to set up and go there.
Yeah. No, we're going to the demo.
Go
Across the
ahead,
room.
just
back down.
carry that down. I'm gonna be good service.
What are we doing, Lucy?
I'm just WhatsApping Seb Code actually to say we're here.
Have you got his number? Oh,
Did
come
you
on,
say-
we've got to get a photo of
Do you see
it.
there are 4 trainers, sir, or 6 trainers? How many trainers are there?
On the course?
4.
4.
No.
Our
Here.
trainers.
No. Oh, our trainers?
Yes.
Oh, we've got 4 trainers
Why?
here, and we're training.
6.
6.
6
Six.
or 8 is it?
No, 8. Oh God.
Seven.
Seven, is it?
Seven,
Yeah.
seven.
Seven, yeah. Yeah. I've got 4 people who are training 7 officers.
The disadvantage of setting up is breaking down.
Yeah, well, that's always the way, isn't it? It's like a party, isn't it? You know?
Yeah.
One female officer and 3 male here training your team. And your team have got 3 females and 4 males.
You going down, Lucy?
Hmm?
You going down?
Hello?
You know, how will you stuff it?
Can I put this in your office?
Yeah.
Because they've all gone and they're all downstairs.
Because we're not going back. I thought we were down the corridor, but they're not.
Yeah. So, shall I put this in
Yeah,
your
yeah,
office?
yeah.
Is that alright?
Yeah.